think I'm fortunate to not care and to have a mother who like very much from a young age like you can do what you set your mind to, and I have full confidence that you can make a career in art, and it does not matter what people think. And so I think having that as my framework for all these years as I've been like coming up through this and doing it, it's really helped. But yeah, the art is just not valued with Muslims, and it's really tragic because I think our communities are at a loss.
Hi guys, welcome to episode 42 of the Thoughtful Banter podcast. I'm your host Matthew with my co-host Hussein.
Yes, sir.
And today we are joined by sister Sasa Aakil. And this episode is going to be lit, inshallah. If you guys don't know, fun fact, Sasa is my wife and Hussein's sister. So hopefully we have a good time recording this episode. And before we begin, we're going to be shouting out the patrons. Shout out to Muhammad, shout out to Justin, shout out to Ali, shout out to Latifa, shout out to Ahmed, shout out to Ali, shout out to Asad, shout out to Deadman, Reza B, Zero, Hashim, and the new one, DJ Dirty Doorknob. Not sure if I should say that name out loud, but I've said it. So
it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Also, before we jump into this episode, we also want to give a quick shout out to one of the sponsors of this episode today, Wahda Clothing. Wahda Clothing is a brand that promotes unity through clothing. Wahda is more than just clothing. Interestingly, Wahda means like one, so it's kind of in the concept of the name. Wahda is more than just clothing. It's a movement towards fostering harmony among people. Through the unique and fashionable designs, Wahda aims to promote a sense of togetherness, transcending boundaries, and celebrating diversity. We have a 10% off code. Use code THOUGHFUL Banter, all one word, for 10% off your order. I need you guys to show out because I have a little bet going. Not bet, it's not really a bet. But I have a little competition going with the founder of this company. So if you guys could please show out, go to wahdacode.com and use code THOUGHFUL Banter for 10% off. You'll get a nice t-shirt.
And we already made our orders. All right. So if we're not showing up right now, it's because this drop is new. But make sure if you're following Thoughtful Banter on Instagram, which you should be, we are reposting their content. If you're following us on TikTok, which you should be, we're doing that as well. So make sure you show out and show our brother some support, some love. Aha. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
How are you?
I'm cool. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for showing out. We've actually been encouraged to bring Sasa on the show for a minute now, for several reasons. One, she's dope. She makes really cool art.
That's completely unbiased.
That's completely unbiased. And it's crazy it's taken us this long, but alhamdulillah, we're having you on now. Mm-hmm. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. Should be fun.
I'm not going to read. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, just give a little background.
Yeah, we're going to give a little bit of a background. Sasa's bio is thick, even though she's like she's like not even been doing this for like long enough for it to be this thick, but like it's impressive. So Sasa is a 20-year-old multimedia artist, writer, and the 2021 Montgomery County Youth Poet Laureate. That's like poet go alert. Basically, she is a potter, painter, poet, printmaker, and bassist living and working in Wheaton, Maryland. Not Wheaton no more. Sasa has been featured in the Bethesda magazine for her work as a youth poet laureate. She has also been featured in the Washington Post, Cloud Alert, as well as a WTOP for her work on The Man Was Lynched Yesterday in 2020. She has one new...
Yesterday.
Yeah.
Hold on. You were on WTOP?
Yeah.
How did I not know this?
You know,
like, you were on
Bad Brother Alert.
You were on like the radio? Like you were speaking on the radio?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Anyway.
I was on again.
Bad Brother Alert. Bad Brother Alert.
For real, not paying no attention because that was a whole
Did they
thing.
pay you for that?
No.
That's crazy.
She has won numerous awards in writing and was published in I Am the Night Sky and Other Reflections by Muslim American Youth in 2019. She has performed on the Kennedy Center's Millennium Stage. Did I say that right? Millennium Stage, and her work is included in the 2018 Scholastic Best Teen Writing Anthology. Sasa has been active in the DC art community since age 13 and is now pursuing a degree in fine arts in Howard. Make sure to follow her on Instagram. It will be the first link down below. All her links will be the first link down below. You can check out her Instagram, you can check out her TikTok, and you can check out her website. You should go to her website because she actually hosts an open mic. How often?
The first Friday of every month. So come through because it's good vibes.
And you can get tickets for the open mic at our website.
You've been a part of the poetry scene for a long time, and like you said, you've been a part of it in DC. Slam poetry has a reputation for being a little intense, a little emotionally like traumatizing at times, emotionally charged. But in general, like the poetry scene outside of slam even is very much like counterculture.
Mm-hmm.
And for you being a Muslim artist, being a Muslim poet, there are some aspects of that counterculture that does align with Islam, and then some aspects that don't.
Mm-hmm.
So as you're writing and as you're kind of expressing yourself and your values through your writing,
Mm-hmm.
how do you kind of thread the needle and exist in these kind of two spaces at once?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there are like two parts to that. The first part, like specifically relating to like the slam culture and type stuff. When you mentioned like it's really emotionally charged and intense, it is, and I stepped out of it. Like that was I think for me, slam culture specifically in the way that it exists for young people through a variety of different organizations. There's a lot of like pressure. There's a lot of emphasis put on trauma and pain, and there's a lot of pressure on young writers to harp on that and for that to be their whole identity and their whole personality. I don't believe in that. That's trifling. That's ghetto. I don't believe in that. I think that's really unhealthy, and I think to encourage people to pull that out of them and just re-traumatize themselves and re-trigger themselves over and over is unnecessary. So for that specific arena, I totally stepped out. I was like, never mind, I'm good. And then other parts of just the general, I think, artists, we're pretty against the grain. We're pretty strange. And so parts of our identity or parts of this community that I don't agree with, I kind of walk this line of being like, as a Muslim, my responsibility is to be kind, just, respectful of everyone. And whether or not we disagree on something doesn't mean that we can't share a space doing things that I believe are halal. So if somebody invites me out to drink, I'm going to be like, no. But there's no difference. But in the spaces where we can come together and we're just making art, there's no reason for me not to spend time with them. And so in the variety of ways people can be against my my beliefs, drinking being one of those ways, I find that focusing on the common ground and kind of being respectful to whatever they believe in, even if I don't agree, but also not refusing to engage in those things is kind of how I operate. And it can get kind of overwhelming when I'm in a space. Like recently I was at a ceramic workshop in North Carolina, and I was like the only Muslim there, or one of two, but I didn't get to interact with the other one at all. She was an administrator. And it got really overwhelming to be around people who were like, as soon as the sun went down, they were trying to drink. Like it was a lot. So in those cases, it does get kind of hard, but in general, in my everyday life, it's an easy line to walk.
That was a good answer.
Yeah, I feel like and this is a saying that we say often in the podcast. It's you're damned if you do, you damned if you don't situation. Like if other Muslims are looking at, like, this is like one of those real life circumstances that like actually is so complicated. And it's just very real. I guess what I'm trying to say is like the easy answers that people oftentimes try to throw, like spectators, are like always extremes. Like, oh, accept everyone else's beliefs 100% and push aside your values. And that's something that a lot of Muslims do, right? It's like they call themselves Muslims, but they don't compromise anything. Everything is just, oh, whatever everyone else is doing, what I'm going to do. And the other extreme of that is, hey, we're only going to hang out with Muslims. And we're not even going to hang out with other Muslims who even disagree with us. Only our kind of Muslims. And then only our kind of Muslims. And it's like both are really extreme and I would say like unrealistic. Like we hear the Prophet say that the best path is the middle. But that's also the hardest path, right? Because how do you interact with someone who's like, oh, like you can agree about issues of social justice, but the person's maybe drinking or lives a lifestyle that isn't conducive to yours. And I'm sure that poses many challenges. But on the other side of that, you probably have challenges with Muslims, right? Because I know like in the Muslim community, do you feel like art and poetry, like what you do, is even valued?
Yeah, definitely not. I think, no, definitely like when I tell people in the masjid that I study art, they're like, what are you doing? They're like, you're gonna be poor. You're making bad decisions. They're like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
But I think I'm fortunate to not care and to have a mother who like very much from a young age was like, you can do what you set your mind to, and I have full confidence that you can make a career in art, and it does not matter what people think. And so I think having that as my framework for all these years as I've been like coming up through this and doing it, it's really helped. But yeah, that art is just not valued with Muslims, and it's really tragic because I think our communities are at a loss. Like we're really at a loss.
Just to push back on that a little bit, do you think that art is not valued, or only a specific kind of art is valued in the Muslim community?
Let's talk about it. Okay, so I think in general, art is undervalued, specifically in the community that we operate in. But I think in general,
just to give like the audience a general idea of what kind of community we're talking about, it's mostly like first gen, second gen immigrant families, whether it be from the Middle East or South Asia. And a lot of the times, the kind of art that's valued is their traditional art from back home. Yeah. And so kind of like the people kind of forging the path and doing something that's not their tradition is kind of, maybe there's some tension there.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're speaking to right now.
I feel like even the traditional forms of art are undervalued, as in it's something that you do on the side. It's not something that you study. It's not something that you master. It's like, oh, this is fun. So I do calligraphy on the weekends, but it's not something that you focus on. So I think in those ways it's undervalued. And then specifically art that is in the American tradition, and in my case, the Black American tradition, is very, very undervalued. And specifically contemporary art, people making things that have to do with life today. No one cares about it. And they think you're crazy for studying it. But it's so important. I remember I taught a art class at Sunday school. I subbed for like a day. I'm like, these kids don't have fine motor skills. Like, like we're really at a loss, and it's really tragic because we're overemphasizing studying in books and underemphasizing things that really offer skills that people don't acknowledge.
Yeah. And then like my mother, we had her on the podcast as well. She also talked about this, and she was talking about how like in American schools and also in a lot of these cultures, we focus on one aspect, and if a kid is really good at that aspect, we just force them down that. We like pigeonhole them into that thing. And so they're like completely lost in the sauce. They might be a wizard at math, but they have like no social skills and they don't know how to write, right? And they don't know how to communicate their ideas probably because they've never taken a writing class, right? Because all they've been told is like, oh, just do your math, like do it.
And that'll get you money, so it's good.
Do your math, do your coding, and everything else will come along. But it's like, it doesn't work that way. And so to do the Matthew gym analogy, classic Matthew gym analogy, it doesn't make sense that if you go to the gym, you have a strong body part, that you just hammer that strong body part, because then all the rest of your, like, you're just going to have
muscles atrophy.
Muscles atrophy. But if you don't use them, they atrophy. So sorry, you want to add something to that?
No, that's a great point. And I was also going to say, I think it's to go deeper, and I don't want to get caught up in this rabbit hole because I think we want to talk more about you, but I think it relates to the point of that being a thing, like that issue of us focusing on only certain elements in our communities, of telling kids like, oh yeah, be good at math, like focus on these STEM on these STEM courses and all that, probably comes from just materialism. So our pursuit of what we're told success is in the Western hemisphere, and like people misuse this hadith all the time. There's a hadith that people misuse all the time, and it's that seek justice, seek knowledge, even if it takes you to China. And I've heard that all the time growing up, and they're like, bro, that means go to school. Like that means right now, like your goal should be to study hard enough to go to Harvard, for example. But if you look at what Islam says knowledge is, right? Islam only views knowledge as something that brings you closer to Allah. That's it. Islam does not view 1 + 1 as knowledge. Islam does not view,
not necessarily,
not like by itself knowledge. Now, if that brings you closer to Allah, that's viewed as knowledge. But if you get really good at coding and you become like this Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk genius, but you have no idea of God and you live a godless life, you're in Jahil. And what's the definition of that? Ignorance, which is the opposite of knowledge, right? So sorry to get lost at that point.
No, that was a good point.
Do you feel like do you feel like that is something that will just get changed over time, though, of people in our community not appreciating art besides what's literally back from their homeland, or do you think it's something that we need to be pushing?
I think it's something that we need to push. I do want to say that that art is also undervalued in American schools and American education, and so I think it'll take a cultural shift from everyone, and that'll take effort. And I think a lot of those efforts are being made in like the broader American society, but I think we really need to bring that into our masajid, because things do change over time, but it's going to take a long time, and who knows like when people will value this work, if ever. But I think it'll take communities and people really making an effort, and I think we do, which is great. But Stu singing in English. I mean, he's singing in English, and and you know, just like reciting English poetry and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll take time.
Yeah, just to kind of play devil's advocate for a minute.
Oh Lord, that phrase is just an absolute no. But go ahead.
Just play devil's advocate. So there's this concept of like not behaving in the ways that the kuffar or the non-believers behave. Right?
Okay. Yes.
And so when you think about American forms of art, what often comes to mind is like pop music, rap music. I don't know how much poetry is in like the mind of like the random, you know, person walking down the street or the random masjid goer. Like I doubt that even crosses into their mind. But perhaps someone comes into the masjid and is like, "Oh, I want to do a rap." There's no music, no nothing, but it's like a rap for Imam Hussein, for example. Do you think that perhaps like that pushback is because, you know, rap used to be something that was a lot more revolutionary in its inception, but now it is like, I will even admit myself, like it's like a hot mess. It's a hot mess. People talk about wild things. So is there an argument to be made, like, because we don't want to be adjacent to or make connections with this thing, that we should just keep it away? And if not, how do you like walk that line?
Yeah, I think that my knee-jerk thought, and maybe this is wrong, maybe I need to qualify, but my knee-jerk thought is that framing of imitating the kuffar is ethnocentrist and racist. That's how I think of that, because it doesn't make sense to frame the cultural production of an entire group as like kafir. Like that doesn't make any sense.
I mean, but there are, I get pushback.
But no, hold on. And I think a lot of these Middle Eastern, a lot of these forms of art that are being transplanted from wherever these communities originate are also based in their music, and they're based in their songs, and they're based in their whatever that have nothing to do with Islam, and then they married those two things. So this idea that American music, which is black, that black music cannot be brought into Islam and cannot be fused in that way, I think it's baseless, and I think it's racist. I think it comes from this idea of people, one, having this kind of like anti-American culture, but then also this international anti-blackness that exists.
So, sorry.
I want to add to that point. And I know you're asking her that, but to me that doesn't make any sense, because when Rasulullah was like alive and like first spreading Islam, the Arabs, everyone knows this, right? Like no school of thought disagrees with this. The Arabs at the time revered poetry. So how did the Prophet bring them to Islam? The Quran was literally like one of the evidence of the Quran's magnificence was how poetic it was and how it was superior to any poetry that was written at the time. They're like, no way this came from a human, bro. This must have come from God.
Yeah.
This poetry is better than our poetry. But they're a kuffar. So it is an interesting question, because there are things even like in the laws of Islam, there were things and customs and practices that the Arabs did that were, they call it, there's like a distinction between like established law, which is the law that the Prophet and Allah sent down that were like new things. And then there's like the things that were kind of subsumed, that were already a part of the culture, but they kind of became law. Right? So there is this like
aspect where, okay, some of the things that people do we can do them as well. But then there are things that also we stayed away from. I'm just pushing back on Sasa, because she was talking about, and I do think that she's right. I do think a lot of it is racism, right? Or at least connected to racism. But I do also think there's some of these people are coming from, they think they have a point. And I think there are people who can kind of transcend that racism and might see past, like, oh, well, these people that we don't agree with do this thing and it's considered a thing by these people. Maybe we shouldn't be associated with that.
I think for me, the argument becomes, I'm trying to phrase this. The argument becomes one of culture. So if you can bring in your culture, then I can bring in mine. And I feel like it's that simple. It's like, if I, like, one thing that I do when I recite poetry about, like, Imam Hussein during Muharram, I bring in lines from slave hymns, because from Negro spirituals, because for me, that is part of my ancestry, that's part of my culture, and that's beautiful music with beautiful themes that directly relate to what I'm talking about. And the plight of my people directly relate, and directly, I guess for me, I directly draw inspiration in relation to that from Imam Hussein. And so when I say, and before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. That song is talking about Jesus. Like, that is the Lord that song is referring to. But for me, as a Black Muslim whose culture is still inherently intertwined with this Black, and specifically like Black Christian kind of practice, I can bring in that part of my culture, and instead of talking about Jesus, I'm talking about Allah, I'm talking about my Lord. And I think that's perfectly fine and that's fair. And so, like, for me, I wouldn't pull up into Imam Al-Asr and do a rap. But that's because I don't think that community can take that. That's not because I think rapping is wrong.
Okay, so where do you think that line would, like, where would you draw the line? Like, hypothetically, there existed some type of people and they always...
This is too scholarly.
Huh?
This is too scholarly. Because you're asking her what's her opinion or what's right.
No, I'm saying, where does she draw?
Okay.
Yeah. And say they had a practice that was musical in nature. And it was either extremely ratchet or, like, extremely wild. And not only you, but, like, the general society, when they heard something like that, what came to their mind was that. How would, like, is that then is there room for that to be kind of subsumed, or is that in your? I
feel like there is, because I feel like there's always room to make a cultural shift, and there's always, I think Black folks have this great power of, like, defining things for ourselves, and I think there's always room to do that for any people. But I don't know, it's a little bit abstract, so I can't answer specifically. Yeah. But I feel like yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, that would just be kind of. Pushing back against some of what you were saying, not against, but, like, challenging some of what you were saying. So yeah, but I do have another question that's not quite related to this. Is, I know you mentioned how, like, poetry, art in general, isn't really appreciated in America, but there are efforts being made in that arena, especially in our centers and masajid. Not really, at least, like, the version that we're thinking of. More broadly, where do you think art and poetry kind of fits in, like, the world?
In the world?
In the world, as, like, what role should it play? What role does it play? What role should it play?
It's a great question. Everywhere. Art is everything. Everything is art. Living is art. Art is art. Okay, so I think that art truly has this power to define a society's subconscious. It impacts our psyche, it ebbs and flows, and it moves the way we think. It's like the ocean on the sand. It shapes us. So I think the place that art takes in the world is, for me, should be used and can be always used as a vehicle for justice. Because when we have this great power as artists to collectively shape the minds of the people around us, what we should be using that power for is to move the world toward justice, towards just thinking, towards just policies, towards treating each other well, all of those things. Even if, your idea of justice isn't what my idea of justice is, if you're believing in treating people well, then that's a thing. And so I think it can and should have space in all sectors of society. I think you should have art in government buildings, which we do, maybe more. I think you should have art on public display, like in museums and galleries. I think they should be accessible. I love the free museums in DC. When I have to pay to get in a museum, I'd be like, what is happening? I think it should be in people's homes. I think it should be in people's conversations. And the thing is that it is. People just don't think that it is because it's in your music when you're listening. It's in your books when you're reading. It's in the murals that you see on the street. And so art is funny because it's so ubiquitous that people don't see it. And so it's wild that it's undervalued because they don't realize that art is everything. And when you think about, for me, I'm studying ceramics in school. When you think about the fact that clay, you can't wake up in the morning and eat breakfast without touching something that's made of clay. Like these things are in our world all the time. And so it's also funny when people say you can't make money as an artist because it's like, no, it's applicable in everything. Of course you can. But it's everywhere. And so the place that it should have in society is the place that it does have in society, which is being everywhere. And I think the way that it should be utilized is to promote that kind of justice in the world.
That was a good.
That was a beautiful answer. And like, a part of me has one rabbit hole that I want to go down, but I also know like you're here as our guest, so I want to focus more on your work.
We can talk about it on the car ride.
So we can talk about that later altogether. But I want to, based on what you just now said, I want to actually ask you more about your specific projects.
Mm-hmm.
That was a short, by the way.
One of your bigger projects that I feel like I observed actually was like influence your life, and like during this time you're like working crazy busy, but I think it gave you like a lot of momentum. Was your A Man Was Lynched Today project?
Yes, it did. Yes.
A Man Was Lynched Yesterday project.
Yeah.
I want you to maybe tell the audience a little bit about that project, how it came to be, and just how it influenced your life.
Okay, yeah. So I've been talking about it a lot recently, which is funny. The A Man Was Lynched Yesterday project was a mailing campaign. So it came about kind of really suddenly. But what I did was that after the death of George Floyd, I began printing A Man Was Lynched Yesterday, which is a phrase that's 103 years old this year. And it was first popularized by the NAACP as a way to call out the lynching crisis that was happening in the 1920s all throughout the South. And so I printed that phrase on postcards, and then I allowed people to order those postcards for free, which is crazy. And I sent it to them, and then they would send them to people who they thought should receive them. And so I encourage people to send them to politicians, police departments, their friends and families. I had colors for each, although people did not ascribe to the colors, which was funny. And I did that for like a year. And it was wild, or maybe like 9 months. And it was really wild. It was really educational because I think I learned the like potency of collective power and what that can look like and what that is. And kind of the biggest lesson I think was I learned the power of a voice, and specifically my voice. And I learned that I could do things even though it didn't always feel like I could. And so that project specifically, I printed like by hand with the help of people in this room, over 700 postcards, sent them out to more than 100 people. And they sent those out, and they sent me like pictures of the letters, of the messages that they had written on them. And it was really cool, but it's also very interesting, me reflecting on it. Like now, 3 years later, I was 17 when I was doing that. There's no measurable like impact of that project. I don't know who received them. Well, I do know some of who, but I don't know what they did with them. Like I know Hogan got a few, probably threw them just in the trash. But
I didn't know Hogan got some. That's
but it's really
Larry Hogan was the former governor of Maryland.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting.
Wait, let me finish.
Sure.
So it's really interesting because I was so empowered by it, but also like the remnants of it mostly I think exist in the minds of the hearts of people who participated, and not necessarily in the impact of that sending process. Although that is not to be undervalued. I just think that's an interesting point. And then through that, I was on, Washington Post and WTOP. And then also 3 of my postcards ended up in the National Postal Museum, Smithsonian. And so I think that's crazy because when I sit down to think about it, I'm like, they have my cards in their collection. Like, that's wild. Like, in 100 years, they might decide to pull them Jones out. It's just really interesting. And so for me, it was a really powerful moment, but I often wonder about how the ripples impact people now.
2 quick points before you ask your question. Like, really quick, just confidence. 1, everything is not art, everything is philosophy. But anyways.
Hold on, both of those.
You guys,
Why are you
Two.
like contrary?
take this from
Two.
Right.
On your point about like no one can make like you can't make money doing art. This is America. God bless America. You can make money doing anything. So.
I hate you.
You're
I'm gonna cut you
ridiculous.
off.
That's hilarious. No, but that's true. People thinking you can't make money doing art, it's like you're tripping.
Yeah.
Please stop.
If
You don't know
that is
anything
a
about the
poverty
world.
mindset. I was going to say, it's really interesting, and I think it's actually like when I was watching you go through that, it was actually influencing me because I was thinking like you were focusing on just printing, and like your room was a mess. So you guys can like go into like the Washington Post about it. Like they literally describe like how your room just became like a studio.
Yeah.
But like you were just printing, and I think it's a really interesting point because anyone else, most people, I feel like in our generation, right, we're very social media focused. 1,000 views isn't a lot of views. We want like 1 million views, and if we're not going to get millions of views doing something, then is it even worth doing, right? But like that's the mindset. But when you're just printing these, you're just focusing on I'm going to print, and I don't care how many people see it. I'm just going to print, and that kind of, I guess, like dogged devotion and motivation, just doing something, and that focus really matters because that's the kind of thing that makes ripples. And also, like your art is so. I'm trying to find the right word. Your art is so attention grabbing because like you say like very like it's a very shocking statement. Like to pick a man was lynched yesterday. Like anyone seeing that postcard would first look at it like what? It's very charged language, you know. But I think like that's obviously purposeful because you're trying to make someone like think, and I think that's also like probably to your point of justice, right? Like you want your art to be something that relates to justice. It's almost like you want your art to be a calling of waking up people's fitra, right? Would you say that's a fair point?
Sounds good. Yeah, never thought of it like that, but I think
because it's like you can't ignore it, you know.
Yeah.
And also, you want to talk about what you've been doing with your pottery lately, with all the pieces. What's written on them?
Sure.
Or is that a secret?
No, it's not a secret. I've been just working on, I think for me, like this idea of like art impacting the subconscious is really something that I think about often. And so one thing that I've been working on recently is that I've talked about like this whisper. I think every piece of art impacts the subconscious. Therefore, if I whisper something, it will ripple in the subconscious and it'll matter. So what I've been doing is with most of the things I create recently, especially the ceramic forms, I'll write like protest phrases or chants or things that I think are powerful. So I made a vase and I wrote "No justice, no peace" on it. And then I made another vase and I wrote "We are here" on it. And so for me right now, that's how I'm approaching this conversation of like enacting justice with the things that I create in a very simple and quiet, but hopefully, inshallah, powerful way, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess, did you have a question?
Yeah, mine is like, it gotta be long. So if you have a short question.
No.
Okay. So this is a conversation I was actually having yesterday with someone. And we were basically talking about like, does Islam, this is going to sound like completely unrelated, but I'm going to wrap it back around, don't worry. Does Islam care about your happiness? And I said, I think Islam cares about human flourishing. And sometimes it doesn't always bring about a sense of happiness, but it is true flourishing in the sense that you're bringing yourself closer to God through those actions. And then obviously if you get like down on a more granular level, once you feel that spirituality and that connection, you'll also experience happiness because you know those things are getting you closer to the goal. And I kind of like it into like college. College, we all go through the 4 years of college. It sucks.
Not me, Dad.
It's grueling. It's hard. It's grueling. It's hard. But the whole time you're thinking like, I'm going to get that degree and it's going to be worth it. So like, I may not be happy in this moment, but I know that this is for a better cause that will make me happy or will bring me felicity or will bring me flourishing in the future. Aristotle talks about
philosophy major. Okay.
Hold on.
Okay,
I want to wrap it all together.
Okay, let's go.
Aristotle also talks about this concept of like flourishing. He talks about how like this is basically the end stage that humans should be getting to. Obviously, his conception of flourishing is different. He talks about people like having more leisure time, drawing, doing art, like doing the things that they're passionate about, and not having to worry about like the grind of like living and
Capitalism.
the grind of living and the grind of living paycheck to paycheck and stuff like that. He talks about this end stage utopia where everyone's kind of flourishing. Now, being that our primary identity is a God-centric, should be like a God-centric creature. It should be our understanding that we are creatures of God, and that what we do should kind of everything we do should move ourselves towards that goal and towards Him. Before like our race, before our culture, before our clan, before our tribe, like any of that things. First and foremost, we're God-centric. We're God-created beings, and that's how we should understand ourselves. So I know in art especially, but in other things too, philosophy, whatever, people express their identities or what they think are their identities, what they think are their primary identities through these mediums. How do you kind of balance between yourself as you exist and what you understand about your identity now, and then also that kind of like God, that other level, which is the creature of God, who is always pushing towards meeting Him or moving towards Him? Because I think sometimes like the identity stuff can blur those lines and make other things more important than they should be.
Yeah, it's interesting because Sayed Suleiman talks about like, or has mentioned to me, I have to do a presentation about it that I haven't done yet, but you can cut that part out. But Sayed Suleiman has mentioned to me this way that Western art like overemphasizes the human body, and like we focus on like
that human beings are God, or like the highest pinnacle of creation. So I think that's an interesting point. But the way that I navigate that, like specifically for me, is that, and this took a while, but like through years of just really thinking, contemplating, I oriented myself. I oriented my entire practice around God. And so for me, I'm like, okay, I make art. I do it because I love it. I love it because God put a love for it inside of me, and He gave me the ability to do what I want to do. And so if I use this work, so two things. For me, I'm obsessive. And so like I'll be in the studio on campus like working, and I'll look up and the sun will be down, and I'm like, what happened? And so for me, that's a problem because that like takes me away from prayer or whatever. So one of the ways I argue myself is I'm like, this is a beautiful thing that Allah gave me the ability to do. If it takes me away from Him, then it's not beautiful anymore. So
that's framing.
So I'm going to stop and pray, even though I really would like to keep throwing. And in the work that I do as well, it's like if I'm performing a poem at this organization that is totally against my values, and I'm promoting something that's against my values, now my poetry is bad. Now doing poetry for me is bad because I'm doing something against Allah, who gave me this ability to do this work. So that's kind of like how I make sense of that. And so all of my work, I think of it as like a kind of worship. It's not prayer, it's not the rituals we prescribe, but in my work, I'm remembering Allah in every way that I can.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like a lot of things can be worship in the unconventional sense that like most people don't think about because of that. We want to wrap up, and we want to get you to talk about where we can find your work, and shout yourself out and promote yourself. Before you do, I just have one last question. Sorry, one last question.
My God.
We're just coming off of the back of the first 10 days of Muharram. Arba'in is coming up. And we mentioned this in like passing, or like we talked about it, and everyone knew what we were talking about, but maybe we didn't say it explicitly. Azadari, or the mourning that we do, the grieving that we do, the lamentations that we do, to grieve for Imam Hussein and the battle and the things that happened to the people in his camp and his caravan at Karbala. Again, a lot of those traditions are kind of like imported over from first, second generation Iranian Arabs, Desis, right? Do you feel like you're kind of at the forefront of kind of building that American culture of Azadari? And then like in your ideal world, what would that look like?
Do you feel like I'm at the forefront?
Like you're on the frontier?
I'd like to be, but it sounds a little arrogant for me to be like, yeah, I'm doing that. But no, I think I'm trying to be someone who encourages a cultural shift by doing what I think we should do. So yes. What does that look like? Yeah, so for me it looks like and I feel like it's specific because like when we say American very broadly, there's so many different like people in America that you can't really say. But for me, it looks like bringing in that aspect of Black culture, and so that's poetry in English, poetry the way I do it, not poetry the way you do it. Because when I say recite poetry, you'd be like, "Who's gonna say something?" No. So I think poetry in the like American performance type sense. I think know-hows in English. I think I think in the practices of like Azadari and in just general like Black American cipher type stuff, there's this emphasis on rhythm and beat. And so for somewhere in my mind, there's like this beautiful world where like those things combine, and it's not like a morning cipher, although anyway, not like a morning cipher, but it's like kind of finding a common ground in that rhythm and really like marrying those two. There was going around on YouTube, there's this video of this guy who did the Adhan in blues tones. And that was like a huge deal. People were very offended by that. They thought that was so problematic.
Well, there were two camps.
Yeah. No, definitely. But I think that kind of stuff, like literally bringing in our music, which is all the music that we listen to in America. Pop is Black, rock is Black, blues is Black, jazz is Black. It's all Black. So bringing in those kind of traditions into the music that we do, because like, why not? I've actually rewritten "Wade in the Water" in Negro Spiritual as a Noah. Never done it.
It's beautiful though.
Well, you've never done it, but I think those kinds of things, like that's what that looks like in my mind. That's what a beautiful thing to me is a community that welcomes all of those kinds of music. Like for the Majlis that we did at Al Hadi, and it was like a little bit of everything. I think that's how it should go.
Also, interestingly, for anyone who might like push back against like the word music and anything like that, so you're talking about bringing elements of American musical things into like our Azadari process. I just like to point out that if you actually, the maqamat or like the tunes, the melodies that people use for Quran, those melodies weren't originally used for Quran. They were used for people singing in Arabia, right? And so these were kind of like taken. It's all those tunes, all those melodies are based on the do re mi scale, right? So it's like, how are you da 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 in this melody? Are you da 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 da? Right? That's basically the science of those melodies, and it's all based on this like do re mi scale that was originally used not for Quran or not for anything Islamic, but it was used for music. A lot of which was what they call lahu, or like mindless entertainment, right? So the idea that you can't like kind of take these things and then apply them is not even true as far as our Islamic traditional history.
But people
and it becomes very ethnocentric,
people
very
have
problematic.
to really start thinking. Like people have shut off their brain, bro. I remember Sasa and I had the pleasure of being in California and being at a kind of like an open mic with Brother Ali, and he was talking about this because Brother Ali, he's Brother Ali, like he's a musician, but he's Muslim, right? So someone's asking him about like the conflict of like, oh, you're making music, but you're Muslim, and how's that work? And he actually answered it really philosophically, beautifully. He was like, if music's haram, is a bird singing not music? Is that haram? Like, it's beautiful. Like, you hear like, you can get philosophical about it, but it's like there's so people saying like music's haram. Like, you have to think, okay, you not think that there are some sounds that are different because of the meaning behind them. Like, no one here is saying that a Juicy J song is halal, bro. But are you not able to think? Just think, like use your brain. Maybe that's haram because of what's being said.
Well, I'd like to say, like, I also don't want to make it so that it seems like there are no standards. I do want to clarify one thing. Shab in the laws that we talk about, and a lot of times for the scholars that use the term music in their rulings, when they say music, they mean something that is haram already. So when you talk about like, oh well, this thing, and you call it music, but it doesn't have like the criteria of being shout out and music, like that's not included in what they're discussing.
Yeah. But that doesn't translate for our conversation.
That doesn't translate to everyone. Like everyone doesn't know that. So that's one thing.
Most people don't know that. If you're on TikTok and they're looking at people on our own clips, sorry to interrupt you, but people on our own clips are like, brother, beautiful point, but there's music. And I'm like,
it's an
how are you on TikTok and you're trying to avoid music? That's my point. I'm like, bro, get off the internet. But
I mean, there are also some like guidelines about certain instruments, but there's disagreement among scholars about that kind of stuff. So refer to your manager for that. But the second thing is, there can be something that is haram as music, not necessarily because the words are bad. Sheikh Mahdi Rastani was talking about this in one of his clips. That definition of lahu is anything that kind of like takes your mind away from not even just God, but like even what you're doing in the present, right? So I don't know if you guys have experienced, like if you're driving, you put on some music, and then you like wake up and you're like at home. Like you come to and you're at home, and you're like the whole time you were just like, driving along, and then you wake up and you're like, oh, wow.
How did I survive that?
Now, even if that song wasn't talking about something haram, and even if it didn't have any instruments, that could still be considered lahu, and could still be
depending
haram.
on
Yeah, I mean, this is like a general rule. Some marriages have specific different criteria for this, but it's interesting because that also means that like Mata potentially could fall into that category as well.
Yeah, bro, people do Mata for like 6 hours and they miss their salah.
Yeah.
People take it to an extreme, bro.
Yeah.
Dudes will show up to the masjid, not make salah, be smoking cigarettes outside, missing the lecture. They see the lights going down, like, all right, bro. Listen to this Mata.
A scholar told me, he said, there was this group of people that were like, they worked really hard on their Mata, and they'd go, sometimes they go over like way past salah time. And what they'd say to him was, there's qada of namaz, but there's no qada of aza. And so that means like you can, qada, is when the time for salat passes and you make up that prayer, right?
Oh.
So they say for salat you can do it later.
That's ridiculous.
But for aza,
but there's no requirement.
There's only one of them that's watching.
So people can find you. The description down below, whether this is on Spotify right now or Apple Podcasts, you will see Sasa's links. Those links will be your website, your Instagram, and your TikTok. You're available to be hosted for events to recite poetry. You are accepting people to like put in inquiries for pottery, correct?
Yep. Taking commissions.
And if you want to support the open mic, you can go to our website.
Oh, I forgot to mention the open mic. Yeah, sorry.
Yes, people can find your open mic tickets on your website. And it's a multimedia open mic, so you're not looking for people who are just doing poetry, right? You're looking for anyone who's like a filmmaker, a comedian, etc. Just show up, support, and are you still having your Patreon open or no?
No, we don't talk about that.
But if it's the
I need to make a decision now. I need to make a decision about it. Don't mention it. I need to make a decision.
She also has a Patreon account.
Oh my god.
Go subscribe to it. She started posting on Indeed.
Also, don't forget our sponsor of this episode, Wahda Clothing. Please go check them out. The link will be in the description down below. Code thoughtful banter, all one word, for 10% off. I need you guys to go crazy.
Need you to blow it up, man. Respectfully.
Thank you, Sasa, so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
We'd be happy to have you on again.
I live with one of y'all, so shouldn't be too hard.
I know you might have been scheduled 6 months in advance. We're kind of booked out.
Come back soon, inshallah.
Right.
Hope you guys enjoyed. Peace.